Good evening and welcome to the British School and to the first lecture in this year's series accompanying our annual master's course in the topography and archaeology of the city of Rome. And we couldn't be in better hands to begin than those of our speaker tonight, Carmen Esposito. Carmen, who is our current Rome Fellow at the BSR and is soon to start a prestigious postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Bologna, is an archaeologist with unique expertise in osteology and multi-isotope analysis. She's using this speciality to track human mobility in early Iron Age Italy, and she'll be sharing her most recent research with us here tonight. Following her PhD at Queen's University Belfast and postdoc at Cardiff, where she looked at animal bones from British Bronze and Iron Age sites, she's been working with us here in Rome since January and proved to be one of the most hard-working scholars in recent memory, leaving every morning after breakfast or even before for the Museo della Civiltà Romana to analyze and interrogate, not literally I hope, the osteological collection of the Iron Age necropolis of Fermo. Tonight, in a lecture which we're recording and with which our online viewers can engage in the Q&A session straight after, she puts some of these results in parallel with those from Tarquinia in what proves to be a fascinating investigation of Villanovan culture. Would you please welcome Carmen Esposito and Reconsidering the Villanovan Phenomenon of Pre-Roman Italy through an isotope-based perspective, the Fermo and Tarquinia case study.
Thanks, Robert. Good evening, everybody, and thanks everybody to be here. So today we are going to look at the Villanovan phenomenon of pre-Roman Italy, also known as the proto-Etruscan phenomenon of pre-Roman Italy, which has attracted the interest of scholars and amateurs for many years. The reasons for that are multiple. Among those, we want to remember the connection of this material culture with the early state formation in pre-Roman Italy and the origin of the Etruscans. However, tonight we are going to look at this phenomenon from a different perspective, from an isotope and to a certain extent aDNA perspective, and we are going to see how strontium isotope can help us to understand this phenomenon. The main case study will be Fermo and Tarquinia, which are two Villanovan sites which behave slightly different and have a different evolution. But before starting, let me give you a brief outline of what we are going to look at tonight. First of all, I'm going to introduce you to the Villanovan material culture phenomenon from an archaeological point of view. Then we are going to see the site of Tarquinia, which is a Villanovan site in Etruria proper, and which will become an Etruscan city-state in historical time. Then we are going to look at Fermo, which is recognized as a Villanovan outpost in the Picene territory, and which was the main case study of my PhD thesis. Later, I'm going to introduce you to the strontium isotope, and how this can help us to spot mobility in the past. And then I will show you, of course, the case study of Tarquinia and Fermo. Finally, I'm going to give you some future perspective and how I intend to tackle other sites in order to understand better the Villanovan phenomenon as a whole. Let me first give you a little bit of background. We are in the early Iron Age Italy, so the first millennium BC. So we are around the 10th to the 8th century BC. And Italy covered a central role in this position, since we have local culture that emerged and the encounter of people coming from the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Greek and Phoenicians. Let's have a close-up. So this is the Italian peninsula, and as you can see from the slide, a variety of local culture emerged. Amongst those, we can see the Nuragic culture in Sardinia, or for example, the Picene culture on the Adriatic coast, and the Latial culture on the Tyrrhenian Sea. However, you can see that one of the most, then we have the people coming from the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Greek and Phoenician people, that settled along the Sardinia, Sicily, and Italian peninsula. You can see from the map that one of the most widespread culture is the so-called Villanovan culture. This is widespread on the Tyrrhenian Sea in the area of Tuscany, the current Tuscany and Latium, around the area of Bologna, in the site of Verrucchio and Fermo on the Adriatic coast, and in southern Italy, with the site of Ponte Cagnano, Capua, and Sala Consilina. But how was born the concept of the creation of the Villanovan concept? We have to go as far back as the 19th century, when an amateur, Count Giovanni Gozzadini, made an excavation in his land at Villanova di Castenaso, from which the culture took the name. These necropolis show elements which were very distinct, such as we have cremation, where the cremated remains, were located in distinctive long neck vase, decorated in a geometrical style, and with just one handle, because generally the other one was broken for ritual purposes. Then these urns were sealed by a reentrant rim balls, such as this one I'm indicating in the slide, and located in pit excavated in the earth. So a Villanovan necropolis might have come across as this one, where we have circular or quadrangular pits, and where the biconical urns were located inside. Ever since Giovanni Gozzadini discovered, other Villanovan sites and necropolises were found across the Italian peninsula. Amongst those, we have Villanovan cremation in Emilia-Romagna and Tuscany, in the site of, for example, Bologna, Vetulonia, Volterra in Chiusi, and also Verrucchio on the Adriatic coast. And as you can see from the pictures, the urns are very similar across the different sites. Then we have a Villanovan cremation found in southern Etruria, also known as northern Latium. We have the site of Vulci, Veio, Tarquinia, and Cerveteri. And again, we have long neck vases with the geometrical decoration, engraved geometrical decoration, covered by reentrant rim balls, and the site of Fermo on the Adriatic coast. Other Villanova necropolises were found in the Campania region, and these are the sites of Capua, Sala Consilina, and Ponte Cagnano. Even if the shape of the vase slightly varies from the one that we have seen before, the concept is very close. So from this moment onward, to classify a site as Villanovan, there were three main features. Amongst those, a particular way of occupying the territory, the funerary ritual, which consists mainly in cremation, at least in the first phases, and then Villanovan sites, settlements, and necropolises were associated to Etruscan settlements and necropolises. Therefore, Villanovan communities were believed to be ancestor to the Etruscans. In the next slides, I'm going to entangle these three main features. First of all, the proto-urban revolution of Etruria. We are around the 10th century BC, in between the final Bronze Age and the early Iron Age. We can see that final Bronze Age centers, which were around 3 to 10 hectares, the white circle in the map we are in southern Etruria, which is the most investigated area so far. They were abandoned, and bigger center, larger proto-urban center, which reach up around 180 hectares circa, were occupied. These sites become eventually Etruscan city-state. As far back as the 1969, Renato Peroni, a main Italian proto-historian, stated that in the whole Villanovan area of Etruria, proto-urban center emerged, while in the surrounding area, the final Bronze Age settlements disappeared. It seems as if new forms of political power have arisen, forcing different tribes and people to live together. But how do this Villanovan site look like? So we are still in southern Etruria, and I'm showing you the site of Veio, Cerveteri, Tarquinia, and Vulci. We can see that all these sites are located in naturally defended plateau, which can reach up magnitude of 125 to 175 hectares. Some centers are, however, smaller, such as the Tulonia, which reaches up 40 hectares circa. These sites were all located in strategic areas for the control of resources, in proximity to good arable lands, sea, and rivers. And all of them were surrounded by necropolises, which are indicated in black squares in the maps. Another important element, as we have outlined, highlighted in the previous slide, is the funerary ritual. As early as the first phases of the early Iron Age, sites such as Vulci, Tarquinia, and Veio were characterized by cremations. Some other sites show both cremation and inhumations. We find in Villanova necropolises several hundreds of cremation, and there is a real formalization of the cremation, particularly in the first phases in the 9th century BCE, where generally single individuals were buried with grave goods. So the individual was cremated, and then the bones were sometimes crushed and located in urns such as this one from Tarquinia, and then located in pits excavated in the earth. The urn could be, was generally a long neck vase decorated by a geometrical engraved decoration, and the bowl could be either a reentrant rim bowls or an helmet alternatively, and sometimes hat urns. Generally, the urn had just one handle on the shoulder because the other one was broken for ritual purposes. A very important element of the early phase of the Villanovan funerary ritual is that we find a very strict stylistic code. And to show that, I'm showing you two pictures. One which represents the proto-Villanovan material culture and funerary urns that comes from proto-Villanovan necropolises. On the other hand, we have the Villanovan urns coming from the site of Tarquinia. As you can see yourself, the shape of the vase in Tarquinia, but also in other Villanovan sites, is very punctual and is very codified compared to the more variable shape of the final Bronze Age vases. Also, the decoration is very precise and it respects very precise location on the vase. We have a range of comb-incised geometrical decoration. Method and motifs are located on the shoulder, and triangles and meanders are generally located on the neck. So the pit can be of different type. We have the tomba pozzetto with just the pit covered by a stone slab, and generally the urn was located inside the urn, and around the urn there were the ash remnants, the terra di rugo, so-called terra di rugo. Alternatively, we have a more complex form, the so-called pozzetto a risega, which consists of an upper pit with vertical walls, and at the bottom of which was an urn that was generally covered by a stone slab. More rarely, we have stone containers where the urn was located inside, and the stone container was then located inside the pit. As for grave goods, we have to highlight that we have typical, so at the beginning of the early Iron Age, we have very few grave goods accompanying the individual. In this case, I'm presenting the Tarquinia grave goods, and we have a male grave good with the brooch and a razor on the left. And on the other side, we have a female grave goods with a couple of brooches. The ritual becomes more complex later on. In fact, we have in phase 2 an increasing number of inhumation and an increasing number of grave goods that accompany the individual. In particular, for example, for women, we have weaving tools such as spindle wool or distaff, or an increasing amount of drinking vessels. To better understand the situation of Villanova and Etruria, we have to see also what happened in the neighboring area. So we are here seeing at the south of Tiber, so here is the southern Etruria with the sites of Tarquinia and Bay that we have just seen. We have in the area between Tiber River and Sacco Liri rivers the so-called Latial culture. This culture is distinguished by smaller settlements compared to the one we have seen for Villanova and Etruria. However, we have a very similar proto-urban organization. So we have settlements that disappear during the Final Bronze Age, and we have nucleated centers that eventually become city-states. The phenomenon is slightly delayed and slower compared to the one in Etruria. And then we have smaller centers that goes between 25 to 50 hectares, and only a few reach up to 50 to 80 hectares, with exception of Rome. We have several depositions also in the Latial territory. And the cremation, we have a widespread cremation ritual, and cremation are most of the time found in hut urns, such as the one in the slide. Another important element to highlight is that Villanovan settlements and necropolises are generally found in territory that become Etruscan in historical time, such as the territory of Etruria Padana, Etruria, and Etruria Campana. However, as highlighted before, there are some sites that did not become Etruscan in historical time. Amongst those, we have to remember the site of Verrucchio on the Adriatic coast, the site of Fermo, which is one of the main case studies of this lecture, and the site of Sala Consilina. So today we are going to see two main Villanovan sites. On the one hand, we have the site of Tarquinia that is located in the Villanova and Etruria and become an Etruscan city-state. On the other hand, we have a Villanovan outpost that did not become Etruscan in historical time. So the aim of this paper is to understand how mobility varies in between these two sites, and if it varies. So, as highlighted, Tarquinia is located on the Tyrrhenian coast and is located in the southern Etruria. This is the settlement of Tarquinia, which cover an area in early Iron Age, an area that is wider than the area covered later on in historical time. The main settlement of Tarquinia is surrounded by the necropolises, which are indicated in black squares. And then we have in the area of Monterozzi, that later will become a necropolis, some satellite settlements, such as Calvario, Infernaccio, and Acquetta Abitato. The necropolises of this area are located, are Le Rose, Villa Bruschi, and so on. Tarquinia, so, was a main Etruscan center. The Etruscan legend reports Tarquinia as a leading center and probably the epicenter of the Villanovan Revolution. As for the funerary ritual that we have established, that is an important trait for distinguish a Villanovan site, at Tarquinia we have a very precise stylistic code. The shape of the vase consists of a high convex neck around the shoulder, and again, we have these geometrical decoration that are very precisely located on the vase. Finally, Tarquinia became Etruscan in historical time. For the site of Tarquinia, we have analyzed individuals coming from the Tarquinia Villa Bruschi Falgari necropolises. The analysis was done in collaboration with diverse universities, University of Cardiff, University of Rome, and the University of Cambridge. This necropolis represent an ideal dataset because was recently excavated by Flavia Trucco and her team in between 1998 and 2009. It covers a range of the entire 9th century BCE according to conventional date. It refers to the community of Infernaccio, and 239 cremation and 7 inhumation of the early Iron Age were found, whereas just 6 inhumation are of later phases. The cremation at Tarquinia, Villa Bruschi, can be of Appossetto a Risega, or alternatively, the stone container, which is found in 29 cases and is located in Simple Pit. For Tarquinia Villa Bruschi, we analyzed 58 cremation and 1 human inhumation, whereas we analyzed 16 baseline samples. I will explain you in a few slides what we use the baseline samples for. On the other hand, we have the site of Fermo, that, as highlighted so far, is recognized as a Villanovan outpost in the Picene territory. That means that Fermo was surrounded by a completely different material culture to the Villanovan one. What are the differences then? First of all, the funerary ritual. We have the Picene inhumation are generally crouched and located on gravel beds. We have here a variety of sites, and I want you to remind the site of Porto Sant'Elpidio or Torre di Palme, which is apart from Fermo, just from 7 to 12 kilometers. In Picene necropolises, we also find cremations. But as you can see yourself now that I are expert in Villanovan cremation ritual, they are very different from the type we seen for Villanovan Etruria. As for the grave goods, we have a variety of grave goods that are attested in the Picene necropolises, but very rarely found in Villanovan sites. These are, for example, the double zoomorphic pectoral, the turquoise, or the cotton, that is a ritual vase that might have used for ritual purposes. As for the occupation of the territory, what distinguishes the site, the Picene site, from the sites on the Tyrrhenian coast, we have settlements that reach up 20 to 30 hectares, so are very similar to the one we have seen for the Lazial culture. However, there are not necropolises that consist of 100 or at least many tens of burials. Probably, and this is at least for the early stage of the Iron Age, probably there is a population increase just happening later in time. I want you to catch your attention now on the map on the left. As you can see, Fermo is located around 140 kilometers away from the other Villanovan site of Verrucchio and completely surrounded by Picene site. The site of Porto Sant'Elpidio and Torre di Palme that I have showed you are very closely located to the site of Fermo. But what is the topographical situation of Fermo? Fermo is located on a hill called Girfalco, represented in this beautiful picture here, or on the map. And this, it reaches up, it might have reached up an area of 35 hectares, probably, and was surrounded by two main necropolises, the necropolis of Misericordia and necropolis of Mossa. So the topographical situation closely recalls the one we have seen for Villanova and Etruria. As for the funerary ritual, at Fermo we find both cremation and inhumation ever since the first phases of the necropolises. So we are around the second half of the 9th century BC, and we have this cremation with long neck vases decorated in the geometrical style, with just one handle on the shoulder, generally covered by a bowl, and located in pits excavated in the earth, which can be either quadrangular or circular. The pit was then covered by a sandstone slab. However, as I mentioned before, at Fermo we find also inhumation ever since the first phases. These inhumations are supine, and sometimes located on gravel beds, which recalls the one of the Picene tradition. Later in time, we find multiple inhumation at Fermo. So you can see that ever since this discovery, many scholars start to make an interpretation about the site. At the time, Superintendent Giovanni Annibaldi believed that, highlighted the exceptional character of the necropolises. In fact, he believed that the site belonged to a Villanovan community, the people coming from a Villanovan community to Fermo. Etruscologists suggested that Fermo was a Villanovan island, outpost, or colony in the Picene territory, subsequently embodied in the Picene culture. Renato Peroni, which we have encountered some slides before, had a different interpretation of the site. He didn't believe that anybody moved from the Villanovan sites to Fermo, but that Fermo shared with other Villanovan sites a similar proto-urban development. And this is why we find similar way of occupying the territory and similar funerary ritual. So the study of the necropolis of Fermo started as back as 2015 through the Federico II University, and I did my master's thesis and the PhD of Pasquale Miranda. And we established a chronology for the sites that span from the 9th century BCE till the beginning of the 5th century BCE, covering 5 main phases. This chronology was established on the typology of the bronze artifacts mainly, and has been published in 2021. After establishing the chronology of the site, we were able to see how the funerary ritual changed at Fermo. So, at the beginning of the necropolis, in the second half of the 9th century BCE, as mentioned before, we have both cremations and inhumation. The cremation, as you can see, are of the type very similar of Villanovan Etruria. We have a long neck vase with just one handle because the other one was broken for ritual purposes, geometrical decoration on the vase, few grave gods located inside the urn together with the cremains, and the reentrant rim balls which covered the urn. Outside the pit, there was the so-called terra di rogo, the pyre remains. However, as early as the second half of the 9th century BCE, we have also inhumation. These are supine. This, for example, was located on a gravel bed. Later on, as in Villanovan site, we have an increase in grave goods. For example, in this tomb, we have an increase on the parure of brooches we found in the vase and outside it, and also an increasing amount of drinking vessels, which were used for libation ritual, where a little cup was located inside an amphora. A little amphora. We are in phase 2b, so second half of the 8th century BC. And again, we see an increasing amount of artifacts which accompany the dead. And particularly, we have also artifacts that recalls the Picene material culture, such as this S-shaped knife and steel drinking vessels. Okay. Again, we can see here that in phase 2, we have an increasing number of drinking vessels at Fermo. But what I want you to notice is the second vessel on the left. Does it remind to you something? This is very similar to what we have seen as Villanovan urns with long neck vase, but in this case was used as a grave god and was used as a drinking vessel. So from the 10th century BC, we see that there are no longer cremation at Fermo, and we have mainly inhumation, and these most of the time they are multiple, which reaches up around 10 individuals per burial. What is interesting is that the biconical vase or the long neck vase we have seen which was used as an urn for cremated remains is used as grave god in various cases. And as you can see, we have both handles in this case. The same happened in phase 4, where we have inhumed individuals, sometimes located on gravel beds, and the long neck vase in Villanovan style appears as grave god. A similar pattern is attested in phase 5, where the deceased are still supine, and the biconical vase of Villanovan tradition is still present. For Fermo, we analyzed 24 cremation and 30 inhumation for a chronological period that goes from the 9th to the 6th century BCE. So we used an interdisciplinary approach to tackle this dataset. So for us, it was very important to use the archaeological information, so the relative chronology, in case of Fermo from the 9th to the 6th century BC, in case of Tarquinia Villabruschi, the 9th century BC, the type of grave goods, Picene versus Villanovan, and the funerary ritual, cremations versus inhumation. For the osteological analysis, we look at the sex of the individuals, the age and death, and the availability of the samples. I want to stress that this work is the outcome of the collaboration of many, many people. Which I want to thank, and we have been collaborating all together. So now I'm trying to explain you how we use strontium isotope analysis in order to spot human but also animal mobility in the past. Strontium has 4 different isotopes: strontium 84, 86, 87, and 88. What we want to look at is the ratio of strontium 86, 87, 86 in local bedrock, which depends on the decay of long-lived radionuclide rubidium-87 to the radiogenic rotor isotope strontium-87 and their initial rubidium-strontium ratio. What we want to stress is that the strontium isotope ratio varies in different geological areas. So the strontium ratio that you have to imagine that is a range of numbers, 0.7094 to 0.7096, goes from true weathering to local bedrock geology into soil, vegetation, and water. Local fauna that drink local water and eat local food will take up local strontium. For the same principle, since there is no biological fractioning, people that drink local water and eat local food will have very similar strontium ratio of the one reflected in soil, vegetation, and water. So if we compare human bone tissues strontium ratio to the strontium ratio of soil, vegetation, and water, and they differ, we can infer that this individual might have come from elsewhere. To do so, we have to spot some tissue that shape in early stage of life and does not remodel. For this reason, we look at tooth enamel with, for example, the first molar tooth enamel forms between 38 weeks in utero to 3.5 years of age. This is a mineralized tissue which does not remodel through life and is not subject to diagenesis. However, unfortunately, both for Fermo and Tarquinia, we have mostly cremation, and that's what happened generally to teeth in cremation. So the crown just explodes. So we have to look for something else. And what we do is we sample the pars petrusa of the temporal bone. This shapes in between 16 to 18 weeks in utero until 2 years of age, and it does not remodel after 2 years of age as other bones do, like the ribs or the femur. As for the baseline, this mysterious word I told you at the beginning, we use to sample vegetation, water, archaeological fauna, and soil to assess the local strontium values and compare them to the bone tissue or the tooth enamel or the petrous bone we analyzed for the individuals. So this is a little summary on how we use strontium isotope analysis. Let's imagine that we have two different locations with two different strontium ratio. We have the green location with a strontium ratio of 7096 and an orange location with a strontium ratio of 7089. We have our individual John, which will be called John, which drink local water and eat local food for the early stage of his life. However, John moved to the orange location, decided to live there, and eventually died there. So if we go and analyze the strontium of John Petrus bone or tooth enamel and compare it with the strontium ratio of soil, vegetation, and water of the area around the necropolises, we can see that they have different strontium ratio, and we can infer that John might have come from another place. So again, what we did a strontium isotope analysis for the site of the Tarquinia, a particularly 58 cremation and 1 inhumation, and 16 baseline samples. The baseline samples are also connected to another study of some individuals from Tarquinia Civita in collaboration with the University of Milan. And for Fermo, we analyzed 24 cremations and 13 inhumations and 12 baseline samples. The samples were analyzed at Frankfurt University and Cardiff University. So here I'm showing you some of the results. I want to stress that whereas Fermo is a more mature study, we have already published the paper. Tarquinia is an ongoing study, and the analyses were done just last October at Cardiff. Here I'm presenting some of the results from Tarquinia. First of all, we'll start from the baseline. The baseline was assessed on modern soil, seed, archaeological fauna, hair, 4 pigs and a sheep, and these are the data from the young children and older children of Tarquinia. So if we exclude the 2 pigs that are 2 clear-cut outliers, they might have imported at Tarquinia, we can assess the baseline for Tarquinia, which range from 7089 to 7095. Here I'm showing you our Tarquinia dataset. We have the baseline range based on environmental range, this one, the one I have showed you before, and the baseline range based on children, assuming that they were less mobile than adults. We can see that at least 13 individuals can be considered non-local at Tarquinia. This is the same dataset. In this case, is divided by sex and age death. In red are the female, in blue are the males, and in yellow are the subadults. We can see that the number of male is slightly higher compared to the number of females outlier, with just 1 subadult, or better is a juvenile, that was non-local at Tarquinia. The other case study is Fermo, and this is the baseline from Fermo. The baseline in case of Fermo was collected within 7 kilometers from the necropolis and consists of snail shells, fauna, archaeological fauna, soil, modern soil, water, and vegetation. So if we exclude the snail shells that are very low and the plants and vegetation, since they are probably imprinted by the strontium values of the sea spray, which is recognized as 1792, we can assess that the strontium baseline for the site of Fermo range from 7087 to 7891. These are our Fermo samples. They are divided in cremation and inhumation, so per ritual. The baseline is based on the environmental range, which I have just showed you, on the human distribution, excluding the most clear-cut outliers, and the ratio of children, assuming that they were less mobile than adults, children being ranging from 0 to 10 years of age. As we can see from the slide, we have 9 non-local individuals. Amongst those, 8 are cremated individuals. Just one is an inhumed individual, which is quite consistent on what we would expect archaeologically. However, we must say that there are individuals that are considered isotopically local, which have typical funerary ritual of Villanovan type. So this might have been second-generation individual, or alternatively having a strontium value very similar to the one of Fermo, coming from elsewhere, but having a strontium value which overlap the one of Fermo. Other non-local individuals at Fermo have got very typical Villanovan style ritual. However, the grave goods, such as the S-shaped knife, reminds of the Picene culture. The only inhumed individual that is non-local doesn't hint to any background that could be either Villanovan or more Picene. Here I'm showing you the data set divided by chronological phases. So we have phase A in red, which span between the second half of the 9th century BC to the beginning of the 8th century BC. Phase B in blue spans across the second half of the 8th century BC, whereas in light green, phase C, which span between the 7th to the 6th century BC. As you can notice, our non-local individuals are mainly located in phase A and phase B, with all the individuals from phase C falling within the local baseline. This is quite consistent on what we would expect archaeologically if we consider the funerary ritual at Fermo, that is very similar to the Villanovan site of Etruria for the first phases, so until the second half of the 8th century BC. Here, the data set is divided by age and sex. The female are in red, the males are in blue, and subadults in this case are in green. And as we can see in Fermo, both female and males moved to Fermo. So our non-local individuals are both females and males. Another interesting aspect is that if we consider the 4 more radiogenic individuals here, so the 3 cremation and the 1 inhumation, they have a strontium range that might have felt within an area of Villanovan Etruria, according to the isoscape map by Louis et al., which has been recently published. Another interesting part of this research is that some DNA was done for Fermo of around roughly 20 individuals by Emery Breslin at the University of Dublin. So as we can see, so the individuals from Fermo are the blue one, and they class quite tightly together, with the exception of one individual that is slightly far apart from the individuals here located, and fell within others close nearby other individuals that are from Tarquinia. This individual, surprisingly, is the individual which has been considered also non-local for strontium analysis. So if we want to do a possible interpretative model of the mobility at Fermo through isotope analysis, we can say that during phase A, so from the 9th century to the to the first half of the 8th century BC, we have people moving to Fermo from elsewhere. And we can imagine that there were relations with the local people based on their archaeological data, because we cannot spot possible individuals coming from an area of Porto Sant'Elpidio that is too nearby to Fermo to have a different isotopic ratio compared to Fermo. Later on, in the second half of the 8th century BCE, we have still people moving at Fermo and still ongoing relationship with the local communities. This is attested and confirmed also by archaeological data, where we have, as we have seen in the previous slide, very similar archaeological funerary ritual, which is consistent with what we see for Villanovan Etruria. Later on, in phase C, between the 7th to the 6th century BCE, isotopically, there are no longer attested non-local individuals, and we still have relationship with the local communities. And this is attested by an authentic ritual that emerged with this biconical vase or long neck vases used as grave goods that seems to be reminds of an old tradition. Another important aspect that can emerge by this interdisciplinary study is the use of different data in order to build osteobiography of the individuals analyzed. Here I'm showing you two main case studies from Fermo. On the one hand, we have tomb 59. We are in the second half of the 8th century BCE and in so-called phase B. We have a pit in which two urns were buried, an urn of a probable male buried with a razor, and on the other hand, we have another urn in the typical Villanovan style, buried with a set of fibulae brooches. We have the drinking vessels with the small cups located inside the different vases. From an osteological point of view, we confirm that tomb 59A, the one with the razor, was a male, and tomb 59D was a female. They were both adults, around 30 plus years of age. And according to isotopic data, they were two of the four most clear-cut outliers, with a strontium range of values of 1796 and 1795. So we analyzed also other tissue that shape later in life, such as a canine root and a molar root. And for both individuals, they seem to go towards the local baseline. This might have been because imprinted by digenesis or because both individuals moved to a similar age towards Fermo. So what we see is two individuals, a male and a female, which have very similar strontium isotopic values, so might have come from a similar site, moved to Fermo, and then they were buried together. We cannot establish what type of relationship there was between these individuals because the aDNA cannot be done on cremated individuals. The other case study is tomb 62. So we are still in the second half of the 8th century BC in phase 2b. And in this case, we are seeing two supine inhumations. One is an adult and another one is a child. These were the grave goods that were found with the two individuals, which we have typical fibulae and amber fibulae, for example, from aDNA and an osteological analysis by DNA done by Emily Breslin. We can see that the adult individual was a female, ranging between 30 to 40 years of age. And the little individuals was a male, ranging between 5 to 10 years of age. As for strontium analysis, they were both local. aDNA analysis has shown that the adult individual was the mother, whereas the little one was the son, and they were buried together. So, to conclude, we can say that at Fermo, we have 16% of non-local individuals. These are mainly located in phase A, 9th to 8th century BC, and phase B, second half of the 8th century BC, whereas mobility is not attested isotopically in phase C. Mobility is more present in cremation compared to inhumation, which is represented by just one case. Non-local individuals are both male and female, moving towards Fermo. So overall, we confirm what we saw archaeologically. At Tarquinia, we have 22% of individuals that are non-local. Non-local individuals are more male than female, and we have also one juvenile as non-local. So, what are the future perspectives then? The idea is to go on and studying other individuals from site of Etruria proper across time and see how mobility varies in these sites, in the site, for example, of Tarquinia and Vulci. During my Marie Curie at Bologna, I will work on other sites that are located outside Etruria proper, such as Verrucchio, Ponte Cagnano, and Sala Consilina, which, as we have seen in the previous slide, they behave slightly different from each other, and see how mobility differ in these different sites. Another very important point is try to construct osteobiographies of these different sites and these different communities. And to do so, it's necessary a collaboration with different people and taking into account the importance of the archaeological data, the osteological data, and the isotope data. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, I'd like to thank Carmen greatly for providing a welcome and extremely important scientific corrective, I suppose you could say, to some of the perhaps rather stale at times evidence we're used to using, that is from text and topography. And the insights you've given us have actually provided an extremely welcome human dimension, even though the materials at times gruesome for some of us neophytes. And it's incredible how it tells us so much about, if you like, real people. We'd like to welcome questions from the room and also from our online audience, but now, I hope you won't be offended if my first question is a typically Romo-centric question after you've given us so much information about the Picene and Etruria. But thinking from the little I've read on this kind of approach in Latium and Rome, is it fair to say that this kind of work has not really been done in Rome? And if it were to be done, can you think of the kind of insights that it might offer us about some of the rather stale and traditional arguments concerning population movement in early Rome?
So I think equally as I think it has added great information for the Villanovan sites, I think this will be ideal to do, particularly for the early phase of Rome and for the proto-history of Rome and the Latium area. So I think it would be a fundamental thing to do, and particularly to compare it with Villanovan site and eventually with the Picene sites and see how different the mobility rates is in these different communities, and if it corresponds to the phenomenon of proto-urbanization being slightly delayed or not. I mean,
but as far as you know, it hasn't been done in Rome.
No, in early Iron Age Rome not, but later in time, yes. So Imperial Rome more.
And another question, which is more specifically related to what you've been presenting, did it surprise you, or has it surprised specialists that there seems to actually be more mobility in Tarquinia than into Fermo? Is that a surprising result?
I think it's quite surprising, because we would expect from an outpost like Fermo to have more mobility than in Tarquinia. However, we must say that for Tarquinia, Villa Bruschi, we have mostly individuals from the 9th century BC. So what would be interesting to see is what happened in the later phases, because we would expect in Tarquinia to people come, you know, gathering together to the plateau from these different sites. Not as many as 22% compared to Fermo, which I would expect a little bit more.
Do we have any questions from the audience first? Yes, please, Christopher.
Thank you very much for your very enriching and illuminating talk. I would like to ask a little question really from a state of complete ignorance about proto-history, but I've learned a lot from the presentation, and I'm really interested in what's to come. So my question is really about the interpretation of the results in terms of the nature of Fermo, because at the beginning of your presentation, you outlined two strands of interpretation about what Fermo is. So according to the Etruscologists, it is an outpost or colony, but according to proto-historians, it is more nuanced. It is more like a local community co-developed between Villanovan culture and the Picene cultures. So after the presentation, or based on your results, could you put a determined answer on the characterization of Fermo, or would you await more results to determine what we can say about the nature of Fermo?
So more results is always better, but probably there won't be funding for doing that. No, but what I would suggest, I mean, I would exclude the fact that there are no locals individual at Fermo. So the Peroni idea, which was a bit of a stretch of like an interpretation. So I would say that Fermo might have been, was a Villanovan enclave, where few peoples move from the Villanovan area towards the site, and then it appears isotopically. So that doesn't mean that it must be what a complete interpretation of that in later phases, we don't have any longer people coming from elsewhere, from probably the Villanovan Etruria. And we see also archaeologically that this fact that we see these urns that are used as grave goods is really a local tradition that has been established in the site. So what I would say, there is an exchange between Fermo and the Villanovan sites, which eventually stopped during the 7th century.
We've got what looks to my ignorant eye an extremely specialist question from Gabriele Baldelli,
Yes.
Who says, mi colpisce la mancanza di allogeni nella fase C. Perhaps you could explain what that means, first of all, and then answer it.
So, yeah, I don't, so it's, what it strikes Dr. Baldelli, Gabriele Baldelli, is that there are no local individuals. There are not non-local individuals in phase C. Well, that's what we see isotopically. That's what I can say. This does not mean that, as I highlighted before, this does not mean that people from Porto Sant'Elpidio, which is 10 kilometers away from Fermo, might have moved to Fermo, and we don't see it because the strontium isotopic values between Porto Sant'Elpidio and Fermo would be exactly the same. So there are limits in the research of strontium isotope, as there are limits in archaeological data. So the idea is try to put all of them together, try to give an answer. And so it might be possible that between these individuals we assess as isotopically local, there might be some people coming from some Picene site, but we cannot see it isotopically. Then probably in the future.
Is it generally true that the thing you can't find out is where the people are coming from?
It is generally true, but the more isotope you use, the better the assessment of where they come from can be. So if you just use strontium isotope, why is limiting? Because can I go back? So if we go back to the isoscape, so you can see that there are areas that have the same isotopic ratio, and we can never distinguish people that have a similar isotopic ratio to Fermo that come, from example, from an area that have a similar isotopic ratio to Fermo. So that's limiting. But if you use multiple isotopes, and if you use also the archaeology, that can help you slightly to hinting to some place, but never saying, I'm sure that it comes from Tarquinia or...
We have, in fact, we've got a whole load of questions from our online audience before we go back to the room. Julie Montgomery says, are there any geological or environmental reasons why people stopped moving to Fermo, or would you say they are just political?
That's a very good question, thank you. At this stage, I wouldn't say anything like so radical why this happened. We have just attested that this happened, and then in the future studies with also with the archaeologists will help us to make an interpretation out of this data.
Thanks very much. We have a question somewhere around here. Yes, please.
Well, yeah, thank you. In English, I was just going to ask about the limits, but you explained that there are limits when they are the same, but if they are different, of course, it's okay. But however, as you added, it can be used combining data. Okay. So this question is okay. But the other one was on the beginning. It's not especially about this system, the isotopic things, but when you also show the south, and for instance, in Fratte or Salerno, we didn't show any relationship with the although it is Etruscan, it's said, at least it is Etruscan, is because in Salerno, Sala Irni, is not being found anything that is related to this, that time, I mean, what you call this culture, or it is because it's not considered somehow in this in your study, or I don't know, because near Ponte Cagnano, of course, we're talking about south, and also there are other questions, but not maybe later.
So the question was that why I didn't consider other sites in the south? As another Villanovan, yeah, that's
indicated as a Villanovan and as Etruscan, for instance, because it's an important. I'm from Salerno, actually. It's not because it's
okay.
an Etruscan.
Yeah. I will add it probably in the future. So no, I think it's Salerno, if I'm not mistaken, it's Fratte is, yes. I will consider it also in the future. Thank you.
There's one final question online from Anna-Charlotte Gustafsson. Thank you for a very interesting lecture. I'm wondering about the number of male versus female non-local individuals. Is it possible already to draw any general conclusions regarding if there were more men than women moving than we might have thought earlier?
So yes, apparently I shared this data with the main excavator of Tarquinia, and she was very surprised that more male individuals were non-locals compared to female for Tarquinia. But of course, it's an ongoing study. I have to look at it together with the archaeologists and seeing the archaeological material and so on and so forth. Whereas for Fermo, I think it was not surprising for me in an outpost to have both male and female moving together. So I hope that was an exhaustive.
Okay. Right. Now, if there's no more questions from our live audience or from our online audience, I think we'll stop there and just say how lucky our students will be next week when we have Carmen showing us around parts of the Villa Giulia. So we'll actually hear from a real expert on this matter. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Carmen, and we look forward to hearing more results from your future work in Bologna. Thank you.
Thank you.